Hey guys, it's Ben from Young Care here. Welcome to That Was Unexpected. On today's podcast, you're going to meet Dinesh, the first quadriplegic medical intern in Queensland and a true pioneer in multiple fields. A doctor, lawyer, disability advocate and researcher, Dinesh's journey started when a car accident during medical school left him with a spinal cord injury. But that didn't stop him. Dinesh now works in the emergency department, is a researcher and teacher at Griffith University, and serves as a doctor for the Gold Coast Titans physical disability rugby team. He's been recognised with awards like the Medal of the Order of Australia and was named Queensland Australian of the Year in 2021. Today, we're diving into his inspiring journey and remarkable impact on the world. Take it away, Lisa and Dinesh.
Are you sick of the same old disability stereotypes? We were too, so we did something about it. Welcome to That Was Unexpected, the disability lifestyle podcast for everyone. Brought to you by Young Care and hosted by me, Lisa Cox. Join our amazing guests as we delve into topics that don't often hit the headlines. So let's do this. Prepare for the unexpected. If you're low vision like me or have other accessibility requirements, check out our show notes. Before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of land on which we record. We pay respects to the elders, past, present and emerging.
So Dinesh Palipana, welcome to the pod. Thank you so much for being here. And Dinesh is joining us from the Gold Coast today, is that correct?
I am. Thanks for having me.
No problems at all. So Dinesh, as we heard in the intro, you have achieved so much. I have to ask, what drives you to do all of this?
That is an excellent question. No, I don't know if I don't know. When I was a kid, I felt as motivated to do things. But there are a few reasons behind it. Recently, I was reading and watching some things about the country where I was born, which was Sri Lanka. And there was this terrible war there. And in 2025, where we are today, there is some renewal of the investigations into the war crimes and human rights violations that happened during that time. So people lived in this terrible situation and hundreds of thousands of people died. They lived in poverty. And I think back to that time and I think back to the people that I grew up with, that I lived with and the situation that I had. And I think, man, I'm here in Australia right now and we have such a prosperous and peaceful country where I have opportunities, or at least, I know there are gaps. I know there's work that we need to be done, but compared to the place I grew up in, it's vastly different, right? So I feel like I should make the most of this chance that's been given to me, not just for myself, but for the people that will never have this. So that's one. And then I think the second thing was I sustained a spinal cord injury in 2010 and became paralyzed from the chest down. I think after that, there were so many questions about life, not just from myself, but from the people around me and our society as well, about where I would go. And for me, it's just been about how far can I push the limits and how far can I go? And that's actually been really exciting to discover. So I think it's there are a few reasons for why I'm here today.
Thanks for answering that. Now, you mentioned your spinal cord injury. You were 25 when you acquired that. And if you don't mind, I know you've told this story many, many times before, but you're halfway through med school, you acquired your spinal cord injury and decided to go back to med school. So if you don't mind telling us about that time and why you decided to go back to med school.
I spent a long time in my life trying to figure out, I think the trick for all of us is to figure out why we're on this earth. Like, it's a really existential question. And why are we here? Why do I exist? Why am I on this planet? Why do I live every day? Sri Lanka is a really diverse place, and it has a number of different religions. My mother was a Catholic, and my father was a Buddhist. So I learned about both of those things, and Sri Lanka also has Islam and Hinduism. But Buddhism had a bit of an impact on me when I was a kid. And I think the things that Buddhism teaches you is I guess it encourages you to try to find some meaning in this life. And for a long time, I didn't find meaning in my life. And eventually I found it in medicine, because I looked in a lot of different places. And I think as a teenager and someone in my early 20s, as many do, we sort of look around and we might get lost. And for me, it was through depression and a bit of a dark time that I found medicine. And, I was at work for the last couple of evenings before I joined you today. And I was telling a friend how much I love being a doctor, because we have all this stuff going on in this world, right? We have wars, we have politics, we have economic crises and all that stuff. But when I go to work at the hospital and when I get to be a doctor, it's just me and the human being in front of me. And I have the opportunity to do something for them and hopefully leave their world a little bit better, at least, for our interaction. And there's a purity and joy in that. So that's why I love medicine so much. And that was my why. So when I had the accident, I didn't want to let that go. And I knew that I would regret it for the rest of my life if I did. So it was said that a person who has a why to live can bear almost any how. That's why I wanted to get back to medical school. I didn't want to stop because of this.
Now, about your time in medicine, I've heard you talk and write about being one of the first, or being the first quadriplegic interning and practicing in Queensland. Can you tell us about some of the challenges you faced?
The really crazy thing is, I thought there'd be so many challenges, right? I thought there'd be physical challenges. I thought there'd be logistical challenges. I thought there'd be environmental challenges. Someone once said, I don't know if the patients will take you seriously. So I thought there'd be all these different challenges. And over the last 9 years now that I've been a doctor, going into the 9th year, I've had conversations with students and people who have disability, and we're all in the same boat, right? We all think about what challenges there might be. But I think I really overthought it. And the best thing was to actually dive in and do it, and to figure things out along the way. So a lot of the things that turned out to be challenges were not. And there are many different doctors on this planet, and not all of us need to do neurosurgery, and we all don't, right? So there's a place for medicine in everyone, and I found that in our emergency department. I found that in some of the regional and rural medicine that I get to do. So I've been able to figure out how to do a lot of things. Even though my fingers don't work anymore, I've figured out how to hold the stethoscope. I figured out how to examine a patient. I figured out how to, if needed, to do some simple procedures. So there's a way to troubleshoot a lot of these things. I guess the other thing about medicine is that we've done things the same way for hundreds of years, some of this stuff. And now we're in 2025. There's so much technology like artificial intelligence and robotics. So using some of those tools, I've also been able to become sometimes even more efficient than my colleagues. So So yeah, and I think the biggest barrier, if I can say it, that there are the obvious. Like I said, I'm not going to be performing neurosurgery tomorrow, although there might be a way to figure out how. Uh, but the biggest barriers were actually attitudes, and it wasn't the attitudes of the patients. I've seen many thousands of patients now going into this ninth year of medicine, but it was actually the attitudes of the institutions and sometimes the profession.
That's right. And I suppose I want to talk about that a little bit, only not to, drag names to the mud and point fingers and lay blame, but only so that we can use this platform as a bit of an educational tool so that future decision makers can learn from your story and not make the same mistake. And so that in the future there can be more people with disabilities practicing medicine, because at the moment there aren't enough. And I do know people doing PhDs about the importance of people's lived experience doing medicine and things like that. But so do you think that your lived experience has shaped the way you do medicine?
Yeah, I hope so. And you and I have both been in hospitals as patients, Lisa, and I don't know about you, but my experience in hospital as a patient, like I'm really scared to go to a hospital uh, because of the time I've spent in it. And especially as someone who now has a spinal cord injury, there's so much extra stuff that we need to think about: the wheelchair, the assistance, the environment, the access. So actually, just this weekend, I saw a patient who was in the hospital who had a spinal cord injury like mine, and they were really keen to get home because they're like, well, the hospitals aren't really equipped to look after someone like me properly, which is really telling, right? So as a patient, I think um, I fear going into a hospital. I love going to the hospital, but my experiences as a patient has informed how I work as a doctor. And for me, our whole purpose of existence as the medical profession are other human beings. So in my eyes, I don't work for a hospital. I don't work for a government. I don't work for anyone. I work for a patient. And I want to try at least to give that patient the most dignity, the best experience, the most autonomy, respecting their fundamental human rights to get the best healthcare outcomes that they want. So that's the lens that I go into work with, and so I hope that's been shaped for the better by the experiences that I've had. But you're right, like it was really challenging initially because I had people who said, I don't think the patients will take you seriously. Early in the career, I had people who said, I don't want you working in our department because you have a spinal cord injury. And these were some of the least physical specialties in medicine. They're the ones that I actually could have very well functioned in easily. So it's really been about navigating those attitudes. We spend billions and billions of dollars on healthcare. Australia has an excellent healthcare system, but I don't think we're really shaping that enough into getting the best outcomes for patients yet. At least we're in the process of it.
Oh, thank you for sharing that for us. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that, and I certainly hope that by sharing what you did, it changes the minds of decision makers in the future to get more people with lived experience into medicine and professions, healthcare professions, because I certainly know that as a patient, I would have wanted somebody like you or similar talking to me instead of someone with billions of degrees and qualifications up the wazoo that spoke no truth and didn't know what they were talking about really. So complete change of scene. Tell me about your beautiful mother, because I've met her and I know you've spoken many, many times about her. The mothership, as you've called her on social many times. Tell me about your mum.
My mom is she's really cool. She's the most important person in my world. And it's because she's plucked us up out of a war in Sri Lanka. She's created opportunities for us in a different country. She's always made sure that I was educated and given the best environment and fed and kept safe. So she is so important. And I think I've learned that there is nothing in this world like the love of a mum. Um, and my mum is, she is like, it's unconditional, you know. And where do we find that in this world today? Where do we find that kind of kindness and patience and love? So mum's been like that. And we were talking just the other night, and she was lamenting that she tried to protect me so much during our time in Sri Lanka, but she felt sad that I still had memories of the war and the violence that I saw. But you know what? Like, because of my mom, I think even though I saw all those things, I still have some really good memories of childhood. And I still remember her baking cakes in the afternoon. And I still remember her taking me to school and picking me up and buying me shoes. And, I was always wandering around with her. So I still remember all that. So I think even in the hardest circumstances, she gave me a really happy childhood. And then when this happened, when the spinal cord injury happened, she had to give up her career. She had to give up her marriage. She had to give up everything. And she's been there for me. So I hope that we're at a point now where we can celebrate some of those things, because it hasn't been easy. It wasn't easy to lose our house. We were new migrants to this country. It wasn't easy to see dad move on. It wasn't easy to see all that. And we really struggled financially, socially. So now we're hopefully at a point where we can celebrate some of that journey that we've come through. But she has been a rock.
We all need a mum like that, and I'm very fortunate to have one, but not everyone in the disability community is as fortunate as you and I. Now, I know that you and I have both drawn on experiences from our past, from our childhood as teens, things that we've seen, really unfortunate things, really horrible things, but we've used them as almost as I don't know how to describe it, a sense of strength, I suppose, and thought about those things and thought, in our times of darkness, when we acquired our disabilities, you know what, things are really, really shitty now, but, and you've obviously thought back to Sri Lanka, and you've talked about that. I've heard you speak about those times, and you've written about them in your book, which anyone listening, go out and get it. It's also available in audio if you're like me and need the audio version. So could you please tell our listeners about those times in a little bit more detail, if they perhaps needed some perspective? Because our healthcare system in Australia, it doesn't always get it right, but it's pretty bloody awesome.
Yeah, I think perspective is really important, right? And Australia actually has one of the highest life expectancies in this world. Think about that. There are some countries where someone can expect to live to 40 or 50 years of age. And we can expect to live well into our 80s, and it's not unusual. Again, I was at work on the weekend, and we had people in their 90s and even hundreds coming in. So we have a really good healthcare system that allows us to live for a long time. We have a place where we keep, even if you look at Australia's biosecurity laws, when you go through customs, when you come into the country, it's so safe and strict, right? Because we're careful about what we introduce into our ecosystem and biosphere. So we have a very fortunate country where we have the resources, the economics, the expertise to keep people healthy and safe. Where I grew up, the GDP is really a fraction of what we have here. The healthcare spending is a fraction of what we have here. So they have to do a lot with very little in a country that has nearly the same population as Australia. So I think when we struggle and when we get, we do get frustrated, right? I mean, I was frustrated this morning about what someone is going through, trying to access some healthcare as a person with a disability. But I try to think, okay, you know what? There are still challenges that we have, but we're trying to make a good thing better. And I think we have a responsibility to do that because there's someone else on the other side of the world, like you and I, Lisa, who will probably die in the coming months, who might already be dead, but we get to live, right? So I think that gives me a sense of responsibility to do better. There have been times when all has felt lost, where hope seemed really remote. There have been times when I've laid in a hospital bed wondering what was going to happen to me. There's been times, I have this memory, right? I was in the hospital after the spinal cord injury happened, just laying in this bed, and there were no windows, but it had a really high ceiling, like really high ceiling, this particular ward. And there was just one window up in the sky, and it was looking up into the sky, like you couldn't see anything. It was just the sky. And I remember looking into that, and it was a grey day, and I'm like, man, I would love to see a bit more of the outside. I'd love to see, like, I wish I could just go for a walk right now and smell the air, but I can't. And that's how some of the prisons in the US are designed to, these supermax prisons. They just have one window that looks into the sky so someone doesn't know where they are. So there have been times like that where all felt lost, where I didn't know when I would smell the fresh air, and there is one thing that keeps humanity going, I feel, and that is hope. You and I, our community, our society, the people within, we all hope for a better tomorrow. We all hope for something. And it's when that hope is lost, that's when life ends. That's when we fall. So I urge you, if you're listening, if all feels lost, I think the one thing that you got to hold on to is hope. There have been times when I felt that everything was lost. There have been times when I didn't know what was going to be tomorrow, but I hoped, and I wished, and I hoped. And that hope can be the tiny little window in the ceiling that can keep you going.
Thank you for sharing that, Dinesh. It's incredibly powerful. I know I remember hearing you speak about, and not wanting to put words in your mouth, burning bodies and severed heads. Was that correct? And after you've witnessed something like that, being in a hospital bed seems quite insignificant in comparison.
It was, yeah. I mean, I did see some of that stuff. I saw so much violence when I was a kid. So that also gave me a bit of strength to keep going. And again, I had my mum too. So she was, sometimes that also, like you said, Lisa, not all of us are lucky to have someone. I see people all the time that come into the hospital and they have no one. they're alone.
Yeah.
And I feel for the people who are alone. But for me, I'm grateful that I had mum at the time, because she'd just come and prod, she'd come and prod me with a bit of hope.
Oh, she's a good woman. Now, advocacy is a cornerstone of everything you do, and you've put your 2 cents into the Disability Royal Commission. And of all the incredible work you do, what do you think is one of the biggest hurdles facing the disability community?
There are many. There are many. There's the gap in healthcare. There's the gap in education. There's the gap in economic prosperity, right? Like we have so many additional costs that we got to cover. For example, there's housing. There's access to the community. There are all these things. But if I could pick one key that would open up much of those things, it's probably employment. There is an employment gap for people with disability. Employment opens up so many different things, right? Employment allows us to buy a house that we like. Employment allows us to eat good food. We can afford to buy good food and stay healthy over the long term. Employment allows us to buy a gym membership. It allows us to get around, allows us to look after our families. Employment allows us to access so many things. There is a lot of data that shows that employment can lead to good health.
Yes.
And exactly. And in fact, the occupational physicians of Australia as a collective has said good work equals good health.
It does.
It does. It allows us to be socially connected. It allows us to feel purposeful, and purpose is really important. But it still continues to be one of the biggest barriers that we face as a community of people with disability. And I think we live in a country we have different challenges, right? Again, someone in a country in Africa, perhaps, I think their challenges would be just surviving. So we probably need to create those things. Someone who's in a war zone in the Middle East or Europe, again, it might be just escaping war. But for us, it's very different. And for us to move forward in this country, it's going to be, I think, about employment.
Well said. And once again, going back to your example in medicine, it's not so much the physical barriers, the flight of stairs at the front door, it's the attitudinal barriers in the boardroom or in the recruitment centre or something like that. Now, okay. Now, you've done so much, but what's one piece of advice that you'd give to people who are just a bit overwhelmed by it all and thinking life's a bit much right now and are really struggling to go on? You've answered this so eloquently previously, talking about hope, but are there any more words of wisdom that you'd like to drop for our listeners?
Yeah, life can get overwhelming. Life can get a lot. There can be a lot happening. So when I was a junior doctor, there were some days at work. In my first or second year, when it was 2 a.m., when there was a lot happening, when there were people critically ill, when there was heaps of stuff going on, when we were stretched for resources. And there were some days at work when I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this tonight. I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to get through till 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. when the next shift starts. But you just keep pushing through. And I just take a second, gather myself, and collect my thoughts, and I'm like, okay, did that drop out? Hang on, my headphones just dropped out.
I could still hear you okay.
All right, I got you back.
Okay, do you want me to ask the question again?
Oh, I can just pick it up from where it stopped. Yeah. So really, it was just about gathering myself and keeping going. And the best thing was when I got to the morning and when I was on the way home, I was like, man, that felt good that I could do that. It feels good. It feels so good that we got through that, and now I can go home and sleep. So I guess the point is sometimes there are times when we feel like, I don't know how I'm going to handle this. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And that was just one example, but there's been times. But just got to try, just got to do what we can to gather our resources, what we got. And sometimes we might have to adjust sails a little bit, tap into other things. But I can promise you that you have what it takes inside. And just like a balloon, we just got to be open to the idea of stretching ourselves a bit. You get through that end, when you come out the other side, it will feel so good. And that's why we go for runs. That's why we go to the gym. That's why people climb mountains. That's why someone went to Everest or the moon, because as a human being and as humanity, we like to do the hard things sometimes partly because how it feels at the end, right? So, there is an end to everything. Everything is transient, including hardship. So I just encourage you and myself to keep going.
Now, you're a researcher, a guest lecturer at Griffith, and also doing some really, really awesome research with biospine. Is that right? Have I got it right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, we have some listeners who are right into the research with spinal cord injury. Hi, Lindsay, if you're listening. So can you tell our listeners what you're up to and all about the research?
So I love the spinal cord injury community because it's a very passionate bunch of people, and the whole community is working towards something, right? And if you think about it, probably as the world, that's what we need to do, work collectively towards things.
Yeah.
So when the injury happened, I started looking at what was working, what was not, what's promising, what's been done. And one of the things I came across is a study that was using electrical stimulation of the spinal cord along with some drug therapy. So they did some animal studies and they did some human studies, both in the United States and Switzerland. And what they found was in both the animals and humans, they were able to regain some kind of function. A part of the reason for that, we think, is because most spinal cord injuries, even though someone might be completely paralyzed and can't feel anything, there are still some spare nerves left in the cord. So it potentially has the ability to reorganize in some way, to strengthen connections and be able to function again. So that's one set of work that was really promising. Then there was another study done at Duke University which used thought control. So we can read someone's brain patterns. It's just about putting the right equipment on the head, and it can read the electrical activity in the brain. And this has been done for a long time. But what they did was they used that and they got someone to think about walking. So think about walking. And you pick up those brain patterns, and then they store themselves walking, activated with thought in a virtual reality environment. Then they graduated them to exoskeletons and things like that. And again, a large group of those participants were able to walk with some assistance after being paralyzed. So Biospine actually just puts those two ideas together. So we use thought control We use electrical stimulation of the spinal cord, and we use drug therapy to rehabilitate people after a spinal cord injury. Currently, we have we've run a study on 5 people, and the results are really interesting. We're recruiting up to 40 people. We've got 12 so far to go into the second stage of our investigations. And it's my hope that we will be able to develop a working therapy for people with spinal cord injury.
That's incredible. So I was going to ask, so a lot of trials are years off, being trialed on humans. They're still in, rats and yeast cells and things like that. So you've answered my question. It's already at the stage where it's human trials. So where can people go if they perhaps want to be a participant or to find out more?
Yeah, we're on social media, so we're on Instagram, LinkedIn. You can Google us, Biospine at Griffith University, and just get in touch anytime if you want to chat or ask questions, or share ideas. Anything. Like we want to create a really collaborative environment with people with spinal cord injury. So anyone's welcome to visit our lab. Anyone's welcome to connect and talk. We love we love connecting with the community, especially with people with spinal cord injury and disability. So please reach out.
I love hearing about the mind control is probably the wrong thing for it. I'm clearly not a science person. So mind control, I know there's much more to it than that. But in your book, you talked about how a snake oil salesman, let's call him that, had tickled the bottom of your foot and convinced you that it was all mind control and you could walk again, and you'd met a whole heap of people who had basically convinced you that you could walk again if you just took some turmeric pills and did whatever. And you talk about that really well in your book. But this is a question without warning, so let me know if we just need to edit this bit out.
Go for it.
Could you explain that a little bit? Because I think I've experienced it a lot and spent far too much money and wasted far too much time going down that rabbit hole and exploring all of those alternate therapies and having every which person say, oh, I can cure this and that and everything. But there are probably some listeners out there at the moment doing the same thing. So please share what you did in your book.
So there's I tried heaps of different stuff, right? I met all sorts of different people. I met, people that claim to be spiritual healers. I met people that claim to be doctors and scientists when they weren't, when you actually do a bit of a background search. I met all sorts of people demanding money, and probably my family spent money on some of this stuff as well, because, there was nothing else. So I suppose there are a couple of things in these kind of conversations. One is hope, one is autonomy, and one is exploitation. And I think it's about balancing all of those things. So we cannot take hope away from someone. I think the moment we take hope away from a human being, that's when the spirit stops, right? Like can't take hope away from someone. Hope keeps someone going, and I think we need people to keep going. So that's one. The other thing is everyone should have the autonomy to choose the type of therapy that they want to try or do. And I think people, like, we worked so hard to develop a country where everyone is free to try stuff. But then the third aspect of that is balancing it against exploitation and harm. So we don't want people's money taken away. And I've come across people who have had this precious bit of money in the form of an insurance payout or something given away. And then someone claims to be a financial guru that comes and takes it, and they've lost. I've actually met people that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars to this, leaving them penniless after a thing like a spinal cord injury or a stroke or something, or an accident or something. I have met many people that have lost money, and then they're stuck.
Yeah.
So, and as long as it doesn't cause any physical harm. So really, it's about balancing those three things. And there's no perfect answer to it. But I think if someone wants to try something and there's no harm, and they're not going to be left broke, struggling afterwards, then that's fine. I've been through all of that, and I totally understand where people are coming from. Like, I don't, I've fallen for some stuff myself, and I'm a doctor, right? I've trained medically, but it was a time when I really needed some hope, and even if it just bought me a few months to have some hope, that was enough, because that's what brought me here. So I think, I guess if you're a listener and you're going through something like this, it's about those three things, balancing that, and seeing what works for you.
Yeah, when we're vulnerable, we'll try almost anything, and unfortunately, it doesn't always end well. But stick to the science, and what you're doing with your research sounds absolutely amazing. So
We're trying.
Our final question, and we ask all of our listeners this, is: given that the name of the podcast is That Was Unexpected, we ask all of our guests, what about you or your disability or your life is unexpected?
Well, I suppose, speaking of being vulnerable, it's probably love. I think love I read this book once called Love in the Time of Cholera, which is like apparently a famous classic book. It was a weird book, I thought, but I was on some random train in Japan once before the spinal cord injury. It was the only book I had access to, so I read it. But it was interesting. So I think love in the time of a spinal cord injury is complex. And for a long time, for about 10 years actually, after the spinal cord injury, I did not think love was possible. I didn't think that, I didn't know how, I didn't know what. I think the way I saw myself was different back then. But eventually, like at the most unexpected time, I think love came back, and it was actually a beautiful thing. So for me, through this journey, the most unexpected thing has been love. And it's probably been one of the things that I am still figuring out. It's probably one of the things that I still talk about the least. But yeah, I think love.
Nice. Dinesh Palipana, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Lisa. And, I think the world of you. So I haven't seen you for a while, and it's nice to see you on the screen.
It's really good to see you.
But you're often in my thoughts, and I'm glad that we got to hang out.
Even this way.
Yeah, exactly.
Take care of yourself and keep being awesome.
Thanks for listening to That Was Unexpected. If you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, then hit subscribe wherever you get your fix. Have any questions or topics that you'd love for us to tackle? Great! Email podcast@youngcare.com.au. We can't wait to hear from you. Check out our show notes for transcripts, video recordings, and to find out more about our guests, plus the useful resources they share. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, X and LinkedIn at Young Care Oz. Let's not forget an inclusive community is everyone's business. So let's keep working together to break down barriers and smash some stereotypes.